Something a little different today. Our countertop ice maker stopped working. My wife loves this thing, so I got to get it fixed. What I'm doing now is I'm trying to figure out what happened to our GEVI, G-E-V-I, I think that's how you say it. It's a ice maker, countertop ice maker, and it quit working. It constantly tells you to fill the water reservoir even when it's full. As you can see, I've already got the sides off and the top off, and the back panel and top panel off. That's what those are. Pretty basic, simple stuff. There's just screws. You remove the screws, pull it off. If you've ever taken a computer apart, it's the same kind of thing. Just these little pressed tin sides to it. Very sharp, so be careful. Now obviously I've unplugged it, got it disconnected from power. It's basically just like your refrigerator. It's got a compressor. This motor turns something up inside here. I don't exactly know how it works, but it turns something and it drops little bitty pellets, soft ice pellets into this hopper. So the device works really well, other than the fact that it had a light up here that started flashing that said it was needed water, and it never got water. Now let me explain that. So this thing works as, in here's the water reservoir. You fill it up to this line, high water line, low water line. It's got a little filter down here that I check. You just pop it off, make sure it's not stopped up, and it wasn't. So that's not what the problem was. It's got a little float down in here that tells it when it's low on water. That's all part of the electronics. But anyway, this is the main reservoir for water. It pulls water from there through this pump, which I believe is what's bad, and that's, you can see it's buried down in there. There's a water pump down in there. It feeds this upper tank, which is the staging tank, the ultraviolet tank that disinfects the water. This is an ultraviolet light. There's also a float system hanging down right here that tells it when this tank needs water. And from what I can tell, this tank is not filling. This tank stays full. That pump down there never comes on, but this tank is full. It never comes on to pump water up into this tank. So that's why I think this pump is bad. Everything else seems to work on it. When it's plugged in, it sits and runs and tries to cool, and it'll drop. If I fill this tank up, it'll drop some ice pellets, but it'll never refill this tank. So anyway, so what we're gonna do today is get that pump out. So the question you're asking is, how do you get that pump out? If you can see them, let me get a light. If you look in there, you can see those little mounts right there. See that screw, and there's a screw underneath. You can see the water connection. You can see this upper water connection and these two drain lines. That's what they are. They're just for draining this upper tank and the lower tank when you want to clean it. But I'm gonna have to remove this right here. I don't think I can get in there with a screwdriver and get that loose. I sure can't get the bottom one loose. And then I have to pull it loose from there. So yeah, from what I can tell, got a couple of screw here. It's got a screw here, both sides. Screw here. And this whole front unit will slide forward and come out, I think. It may be a little tricky around this, but that's the plan. Okay, one more thing. Over here is your control system. This is to the that pump. I've already verified that when the light's flashing up there, using a meter, 12 volts. Across there, there's 12 volts getting there. So I know 12 volts is going down this line, but the pump's not running down there, so the pump's bad. So this control panel is very nicely labeled and color coordinated. So the purple is the water pump, the orange is the UV light, and both of those are labeled at 12 volts, so it should be pretty simple. Now I had fast forwarded this video just so that you're not having to sit and watch me unscrew a dozen screws, but basically going around and just taking out all of these screws that hold this front water ice compartment in place. You have also got to get all the hoses, the feed hose, the drain hoses, and the wires back down fed through this system. One thing to note, all of these go into plastic, so they'll be very easy to strip out when putting this thing back together, so be really careful. You notice that one screw left in that metal plate is already stripped out and just flips around. And finally, I'm down to the water pump, the one thing they built this whole machine around. So it's the hardest to get to, just like anything else, but it just bolts to the side of the tank and comes off. Now the inlet nipple does go through a grommet, a seal on the side of the water container. And the pump itself is encased in this silicone shroud mounting bracket, I guess it is. It's pretty simple. I think it keeps the noise level down. The good news is I was able to read the model number and get this ordered on Amazon, and it showed up in the mail. So I was able to continue working on this thing and getting it replaced. Here's a picture of the water pump that came off my ice maker so you can get a part number. Okay, so taking apart this little water pump that was in the ice maker. It's a little vacuum pump. It's got this little thing that wobbles back and forth in these little suction cups. This is supposed to spin. See how it spins? And as it spins, it wobbles these little diaphragms. And got little check valves. And it sucks water in this orifice and pushes it out this up into the holding tank. But this little 12-volt motor is not working anymore. I've got this, it's a 12-volt DC, so here's my 12 volts on this battery. Hook them up there, and hook this up here. They're already hooked up here on this end. Make sure they're not touching anything they're not supposed to be. Okay. And that should be spinning. And see, if I help it, it starts going. See how it goes? But once it stops, it won't restart on its own. See, it did once, but it needs a little help to restart. So something's wrong inside this little battery motor. Okay. Amazon showed up today, and I got a new pump. They're all made in China, by the way. But hopefully this new pump will work. Looks to be the same. I need to move these wires to here. It has the same wiring. So. Now I would like to say that I'm a good electrical soldering guy, but in reality I'm not. I never seem to really get the best soldering connection, and I've just never been very good at it. I guess I don't have enough practice. It's not something I do very often. It's passable, but again, I'm not a professional at it. So if anybody has any tips for me, I'd love to hear them, because I've always wanted to be able to do a better job at it, to be honest. I've always thought it was kind of cool to be able to do this and make it work right. Unfortunately, I just don't think I'm patient enough to do it, or I don't have good enough equipment. I really don't know. I've tried. I do it. Like I said, it works. Kind of rambling here, but soldering is just not my deal. Before I put it all back together, I want to test it. Yep. Yep. So it's sucking here, blowing here, and it works every time. One less thing to do before we put it back in there is I had slipped a couple of little pieces of this shrink spaghetti over the wires before I soldered it, and this is just to protect the ends. So I'm going to heat those up, let that shrink up around that too. So it holds onto that wire. There we go. Just just like a factory job. Then what we do is just like they did. A little weird, right? They bent those around. Let's see, like this, and had it coming right out of that, exactly the same. I'm going to turn that up, maybe spin them around this way so they're not in the way of the screw. Okay. Now all we got to do is plug that in, screw that on, and we're good to go. I'm going to speed this up a little bit while I bolt this pump back up to the side of this water housing. And again, it's going into plastic, so just be sure you don't strip them out. Okay, now this is just a little bit better close-up view of what you're getting. Obviously the nipple goes into this piece of rubber. I didn't take that off. I'm not sure what it, but it might be a, I don't know. Anyway, I didn't take this off. I just poked that back in there. And this tank's not under pressure, so that should be enough. Down here, I need to put this little hole, make sure this is on there good. And there you go. New pump on the back side. Okay, now back to putting it all back together. So now it's just a process of putting it all back together. And this is the main water tank, ice holding tank. Putting it all back in here, and I call this part one because I totally screwed up here. If you remember those two screws that I put on the backside because they were different, I actually left them in place here, so it won't go back together all the way. I have to pull it back apart, take those screws out, and then put it back together. So that's what I'm struggling with here. I forgot to take those screws out that I had put in there earlier. So I guess the good news is that the second time around, it goes together much easier, and I really know what I'm doing, so it works out pretty well. But those two screws won't let you put it back together. What I'm doing here is feeding the electrical cord back up through the motors and everything, and then I'm actually inserting the feed line up into this top tank. One thing to notice is the bottom drain line. I have to keep feeding it around the compressor at the bottom, and it comes in and ties into the nipple at the back. So I got all the screws in, and if you'll notice, that plate's a little crooked, and that plate has a piece of foam on there that goes up against that motor. I guess it prevents the vibration, helps to dampen the vibration, and that foam is stuck underneath that second story that holds the motor there. So I have to loosen the screws back off, push it a little bit away, and slide that plate, turn that plate so that foam comes back up and gets against that motor. Just something to watch for if you do this yourself. And now it's just going around making sure all the screws are tight and in place. Again, be very careful. It's just going into plastic. You can strip them out real easy if you use a electric screwdriver. So now I got all the screws battened down. I just hook up the electrical connection over on the other side, and then I'm going to go to the water inlet and put the little filter back on. I have to snap in this little screen in here, but it's not necessary. Not in there. That little thing goes right there. That's down in there. A little bit of hard water deposits down in there. So okay, this is usually what happens when you plug it in. There's no water in there. So obviously there's no water in here. And the light here is flashing saying, hey, fill me up. So I'm gonna pour in water. Pour it into the I have this bottom tank filled just past that minimum line down there. And when I hit that on button right there, it's gonna fill that tank. The pump should come on. See, the light's still flashing. Let me shut the door, see what happens. There it goes. So, pump is running. Thing is running, everything's. Now let's see what happened. This is the UV tank we talked about. Okay, see how it's full of water? Perfect. There we go. It's working away. Now, gotta get it all put together. Oh, the door's hanging like that, but I guess we'll find out if that's something I did to it when I was working on it, or it's kind of gotta stay shut, doesn't it? Fan spinning. I can feel that pump running. So now it's just a matter of doing some housekeeping. I'm putting some zip ties around these wires so they don't get, yanked on, torn out. And then also on this electrical connection, there's these funny little white clips that they put on there that snap in, that keeps the wire from pulling off the post, the connection from coming apart, kind of like you see on your car. I'm assuming they did this because they had issues with shipping and the wires would come loose, so they're just kind of an extra safety measure. Kind of a little bit of a pain, but I put them back on. So I wanted to take a moment and kind of slow this back down because these side pieces are kind of a little bit of a pain to get on and off, simply because the door has to be open. First thing, the top piece has to come off. That top bezel with all the little controls on it has to be off. And the front door kind of hooks. You see there, the side piece hooks behind that front door. There's a couple of little tabs in there that hook goes around. Then it kind of goes over the backside and slides down and snaps in place. Okay, so once you got the one side, it's just a matter of going and doing the other side, putting all the screws in, and it all goes back together, just like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that the screws are different. There's some stainless steel screws, and they go on the front and right at the very front of the top. They're stainless steel. Basically, you can think about it anywhere that there's visibility or maybe close contact to the water, they put the stainless steel screws. Most cases where the screw goes into metal, it's the black screws. That's how I remembered it. Now I put this front bezel back on, but I missed it. I did the same thing I did before. There's a lip on it as well. You got it at the bottom, you put the lip in, then you roll it back and put the top in. And it also clips into the sides. So that's kind of a little intricate thing, and I blew that this time too. You can tell it's not connected properly there. Okay, this little piece is pretty easy to get on, but it's really hard to get off if you don't know how. You have to put your screwdriver above the metal and pry the plastic part up, and you do all four of them and work it off. Now to get it on is real simple. You hook that top piece in and you push up on it and snap those bottom tabs in place. Now this is where I figured out my door wasn't closing quite right. You can see it's kind of crooked in there, and what I did is I'm fixing to correct that. I pull that top valance off. And once I got that valance off and I got the door open, I figured out that it had a lip on the bottom that has to be inserted first and then rotated into place. This little lip right here needs to hook right behind that. So you hook it. So you hook it, then you hook these two things in these little slots right here. So it's, like I said, front a little bit intricate than you think. once it's all together. It's amazing how once you get it all put together correctly, it shuts nicely and everything works. All the lines line up. Looks pretty good. So, okay, good news. I just heard the pump kick back on again, so it pumped water. So it should be working good. Haven't dropped ice yet, but it's only about 15 minutes. It should be getting ready to. Now from here on out, it's pretty simple, basic stuff. The back just goes on. There's 8 screws that hold it on, and you can hear the machine getting quieter as you close it all in. Everything starts getting nice and quiet. Now this top part slots in real nice. If you notice, you just you drop it in on top. There's a couple of little L-shaped tabs, and they go into the slots. And you notice it's overhanging about a 1/4 inch. Then you slide it forward, and you put the 2 screws into the back. And these are the stainless screws. You'll button that down and just verify the other screws are in good. And this little thing, these are drain tubes for draining it when you're cleaning it. Look right there. The only thing they left out is a place for the scoop. This little string. Everything else is really well thought out. But where are you supposed to put this? Now for the real test, we'll see if it'll make ice all night long and fill the bucket. But GEVI seems to be up and running just fine again. Well, good morning. It's the next morning after I fixed the ice maker. Got my cup of coffee. Don't really need ice, but hey, the ice maker ran all night. It actually completely filled up with ice. You see by the little sign there on the front. There's no more water down in the bottom. Just a little bit of water, but you can see it's kind of hard to tell, but that's the low water shut off right there. That little float tells it that it's at the bottom, it cuts off. That's full, turned all that water into that ice. So, hey, good deal. Working, and it was all for this little $14 water pump on Amazon. Worked out great. So, hey, I even have an extra screw. I don't have any idea where that screw came from. So I guess it's a little like working on a car. You always have extras. So anyway, that's replacing the water pump on a GEVI countertop ice maker. I hope that helps somebody. If your ice maker quits working, maybe that's what it is. There's a lot of other things I guess it could be, but that's what it was on mine, and I hope that helps you. So thanks for watching. Subscribe and look at some of the other videos I've done if you found this interesting. Thanks for watching. Bye.